Hello and welcome to the most ridiculously overdue video from my garden. I documented my garden, which is in zone 8B, for over a year, and I'm excited to share it with you all today. Yes, it's been about a year or so since I last posted. I feel that guilt, and I appreciate that so many of you reached out and asked for more videos because it did make a difference. So what have I been up to? In addition to just kind of keeping up with my garden, I'm also a ceramic artist and I needed the time to build a new collection of work. Some really cool lamp designs, art pieces, and more. So if you're looking for ideas on what to grow, maybe some inspiration or new plants out there, this is a great video for you to watch. I'll take you through the life cycle of many plants as I experience the ups and downs of maintaining a garden, all from my personal experiences within a year. Let's get straight into it. So I last left you all in the Devil Strip with a little Gomphrena paradise that I created in the fall of 2020. And now it was time to prepare for the next season of plants that would go in the Devil Strip. I needed the area to be cleared out so I could sow poppies and bachelor's buttons like I had done before. What I was left with were some rudbeckia and zinnias that had spread from the other bed. Basically, just volunteers were popping up all over the place. If you watched my poppy video before, you'll know what the Devil Strip looked like. So I had a lot of questions on whether I would have a good year again. Plants that performed throughout the spring and summer months are now winding down, while some seeds are germinating and just beginning their life cycle. The angle of the sunlight changes in the fall, illuminating leaves and creating dramatic shadows. Now, all these rudbeckia right here are volunteers. Didn't ask for them, but they're here. And there's no way that this dense rudbeckia carpet could be good, so I started thinning out these rudbeckias. I wasn't even sure that they would make it through the winter, but if you followed me for any period of time, you'll know that I love a good rudbeckia. To be honest, I'm not sure what I was doing here, probably just trying to spread out the mulch more evenly or just pretending to be a farmer for my neighbors, I'm not sure. I added a few bags of compost to the Devil Strip just to refresh the soil. There's quite a lot of plant material that has decomposed throughout the year, and it's really significantly altered the soil composition. It's a lot more fluffy, it retains water better, and I think it's just easier to kind of work with as a gardener. Here, I wanted to get the soil a little wet before I sowed the seeds so that the seeds wouldn't float away. This year, I used a mixture of these Shirley poppies along with some seed that I collected from the previous year. So a commenter on my last video about poppies mentioned that you can mix the poppy seeds with sand, which makes it easier to more evenly distribute the seeds. Of course, I didn't have sand, so I just mixed the seeds with some soil in a bag and then sowed that. But I imagine the sand is a little better because it allows you to see where you're sowing the seeds. Of course, I couldn't forget to add some bachelor's button too. Now, the poppies I'm working with are really just the common poppy. Some people call them Flanders poppies, corn poppies, poppy poppies, whatever. But they're just the most kind of basic field poppies that you can find. The bachelor's button seeds, however, are much larger, so they're pretty easy to just kind of broadcast normally. This combination just works for me. There's many other annuals that you could try with poppies though, and I think larkspur can work really well, for example. And in fact, I kind of throw in a few extra larkspur seeds every once in a while. I'm not sure it's the best idea, but I press the seeds into the soil by walking on top of them. I mean, I think I was just happy to have use for my giant feet for once. I had fallen in love with sweet peas the past year, so I really wanted to make sure I had more this coming spring. This is what they look like in the spring of 2020. Usually I sow them in pots first, and then I transfer the starters out into the raised beds, and this year would be no different. It's just a good way for me to keep track of my plants, but you can definitely direct sow them as well. I had fully expected a brilliant show of one of my most favorite flowers, so I assumed nothing could go wrong. My seed growing medium of choice continues to be Coco Coir because it stays fluffy for really healthy roots. You have to remember to fertilize it often because Coco Coir does not inherently have any nutrients. They grew and they grew fast, sending out new growth from the ground. They remind me of like a little octopus at this stage. I had a few other sweet pea plants growing in another raised bed too. So let's see how those do. If you watched my seed starting video, I had also sown some snapdragons. They grew quickly from seed, aided by grow lights, fertilizer, and a grow tent. But you can totally do this on a bright windowsill indoors. Here are mine, ready to be planted. I planted my sweet peas and snapdragons out in the fall because our winters here in Zone 8B are so mild. Or so I thought. And with a heart full of optimism, what could possibly go wrong? So it started snowing, and that's not rare in my area, but it is uncommon. It's not really a big deal, because most everything I have outside can withstand brief dips below freezing. It would surely be a short dusting of snow, just like it's always been. I never have to worry about freezing temperatures harming my plants. But I was so wrong. I had no idea what was in store, and it was just another fun part of living in this modern age. And it started out as this little winter storm, and I knew certain plants like my snapdragons would be able to handle it. Here are the sweet peas during the first brief snow before I ultimately covered them up in a tarp. And before you say, in my hometown we have 50 feet of snow every day, so this is nothing. The problem is that this is Texas, which largely isn't designed to handle winter weather. And here are those snapdragons again. They look pretty dang pitiful in this stage, but let's stay tuned and see if they survive. A palm tree's survival is a little more debatable, especially when that palm is not native to this area. If we lose it, we lose it. I did cover a few plants here and there, but it was beyond what could be helped. Here are my other sweet peas, protected in their little plastic bubbles. I was worried about this oleander, which was planted before I lived here. Same with the palm tree. But I have to admit, it kind of looks a little cute with the little snow sprinkled on top. I'm located kind of on the side of a hill, so there tends to be a lot of wind. In fact, the wind kind of created little snow dunes. So we had boil water notices and our pipes did in fact burst, but luckily there was no damage. But then it got worse, and not because of the snow, but because of the freezing rain. The snow really wasn't the problem, at least in my opinion. It was this rain that just was falling and hitting and freezing immediately. It began to encase plants in ice, weighing down leaves, breaking branches, and transforming many plants to a squishy mess. Full disclosure, you should probably not touch plants once they're frozen in ice so you don't cause more damage, but I basically threw that out the window for this video. It was called Winter Storm Uri, and it was one cold. And we did miraculously maintain power throughout the whole mess, where others lacked it for days. It was a stressful experience, to say the least. The winter storm that struck Texas and many other states was devastating to so many people that had no heat for days. Plants take a back seat to the people and animals who lost their lives, but perhaps by showing the damage to the garden, I can give you a better idea of the storm that rolled through here. At this stage, it was pretty clear that the oleander had suffered some terrible damage and likely wouldn't survive. Seeing these cornflowers encased in ice was something strangely captivating to me. It was really calming and beautiful for something that was so threatening to life. And just like that, temperatures rose quickly, and this brief, bizarre chapter that devastated the area, it came quickly to an end. Eventually, the sun came out and the process of assessing the damage began. You can hear all the birds that were quick to re-emerge once the sun came out. Ultimately, it was 108 continuous hours below freezing, sometimes dipping down to 5 degrees Fahrenheit or negative 15 degrees Celsius, which is extremely rare here. Unexpectedly, most plants took the weather in stride. It was just really impressive to see that. The poppies were completely unharmed, which makes sense. And the cornflowers that were flowering were affected, but the seedlings weren't. If plants die, then they die. It's not a big deal. You can replant or choose a different plant that can handle the weather better in your area. It kind of forces you to really come to terms with what you can grow in your area. I thought this Gomphrena grapes looked like it was covered in crystals. It was definitely giving me some Swarovski vibes here. The ice coated the individual strands on this Mexican feathergrass. I'm sad to report that while this blue glow agave looks pretty decent here, it ultimately transformed into a jellyfish. I lost a few succulents that I stored in my shed, which is normally enough protection from the elements, but again, this time it was not. I really should have brought them inside the house, but luckily it was only a few. And this is what my Stapelia looked like a few days later. Oh, you're doing great, sweetie. Once thawed, this society garlic was reeking of the scent of garlic. It was really sad, and it also kind of smelled like a meal was being prepared. These California poppies looked absolutely terrible after the storm. But I'm happy to report that I did have several that survived. You can see here the new foliage emerging from the growth point. And within weeks, they were sending out those iconic orange flowers that many of us love. While not high in quantity, they sure made up for it in flower quality. Look at the seed pods also. So I'm gonna let them free seed to the rest of the bed and kind of fill it out. So as the warmer temperatures began to roll in, flowers were emerging everywhere, including on my Amethyst Falls wisteria. This American wisteria sits above the California poppies and creates these purple flowers that drape down. It's a young plant, so I still need to work on training it into the shape I want. It's kind of a work in progress. The peach blossoms were also quite popular with the bees. Developed by Texas A&M, this peach tree variety is called Sam Houston and grows in zones 5 through 9. I knew I wanted a fruit tree somewhere in the yard, and the peach tree was the perfect addition as it seems to like the conditions in my area. And would you look at this weenie trying to get a picture with the peach tree? It requires a relatively low 500 chill hours. This peach tree is also self-fertile, which is important because I don't have the space to add another. Now, you'll want to keep watching to see if I actually end up with peaches here. And those sweet peas that we planted? Well, it was mostly a mixed bag. Some lived, but many didn't. I had hoped seeing a green stem was a good sign, but there's really only so much a sweet pea can live through. Surprisingly, these Lord Nelson sweet peas recovered quite well. Even providing some flowers to make up for, well, the other sweet peas that didn't quite make it. In time, I did get a few sweet pea flowers here and there, but it was nothing like the previous year. I was feeling pretty disappointed because, again, I was having those visions of a sweet pea paradise, but I couldn't let that discourage me as I worked to create new garden beds atop my retaining wall, which would contain roses, catmint, salvias, and yarrow. And if you look around here, you can actually see the storm destruction all around with dead foliage gracing the garden essentially everywhere. I love how the grass here is just so dead, it's nearly white. Opposite of that area, I created another bed that would be more of a sort of miscellaneous area. I had many colocaceas that I wanted to grow given to me by a very generous follower. So they found their roots in this area, along with Salvia leucantha, aka Mexican sagebush, or is it Mexican bush sage? Either way, it's a wonderful plant and I'm going to talk about it a lot. And Salvia farinaceae, Blue Victory. Certainly it's not very common to link salvias with colocacia, but you know, I was excited to see where this would go. And here I am planting the little guys. There was also a euchera that, let's just say, didn't make it very far in my garden. This teacup's colocacia collects water with its leaves, and I'm about one step away from throwing a tea bag in there, just so it can live up to its name. And as we say goodbye to winter, the bachelor's button, that were once covered in ice, emerged and started the spring season off. It was clear everything was ramping up. Spring truly began with my favorite, the poppy. The Devil's Trip was just beginning to get going. This year, I would really learn how the poppies from the previous year were beginning to echo in the present. Mixed in this front bed were poppy plants, where I had never sowed any before. It started to feel like the garden was this person in charge and I was merely a caretaker. I don't know if anyone else can kind of identify with that also. Like the previous year, the poppies were most robust on the end where there's a bit of a slope. This may help with others who have had difficulty growing poppies, especially if you have poor draining soil. Try sowing the seeds on a slope, which typically dries out faster. This area, which I never sowed any poppies in, was now dotted with volunteers, spread by the wind. It was the beginnings of a colorful scene. When I moved to Texas more than a decade ago now, one thing that caught my eye were these incredible blue flowers that could be seen all over my area in the spring. And while most blue bonnets are in fact blue, you can occasionally find other colors like this maroon shade, which pops up on its own every year. I didn't plant any of these, and yet I'm always so excited to see them each year. Not to be outdone, daffodils began to send up flowers even while their foliage was damaged from the storms. I have a soft spot for these very tiny daffodils, even though they can barely be seen from afar. Clearly this dude loves spring, and if you're watching this, I bet you do too. As the weeks went by, the poppies really made their presence known. I hope you like insects because you're going to be seeing a lot of them in this video. Here is the stunning metallic green sweat bee enjoying the cornflowers. I fell in love with a bee. Oh, and this bee too. And maybe this one. And maybe this one too. So if you want bees, or want to fall in love with a bee, sow cornflowers. I couldn't believe how fast the plants shifted into growth mode after the storm. You'll notice that while the poppies look alike from afar, many have different appearances as you look closer. Some are fully red, while others have a white center. The dusting of pollen is also a really nice visual. Some have more crinkled petals. And then sometimes there's a fully pink variety. As temperatures rose, the devil strip began to fill out. The volunteer poppies in the big bed were just about ready to bloom. I feel like a nerd, but it's really exciting when you see the red peeking through the bud right before flowering. The Rudbeckia were patiently waiting, growing taller each day. Having poppies spread to new areas was an unexpected complication for this other border, one that I was happy to accommodate amongst the Verbena bonariensis, larkspur, and these lovely Gulf penstemons native to the Texas Gulf Coast. It's interesting to see these various plants share such a small plot of land, learning how to coexist with each other. It's my first year growing these penstemons, and I highly recommend them. Ooh man, the way these honeybees wiggle their little bee bodies into the flowers just gets me. One of my favorite things to catch in the garden is a poppy bursting out of a bud. And then of course, there's no other choice but to personify it. There we go, that's better. Having poppies spread to the other side created a really amazing corridor of flowers, one that wouldn't have happened without the poppies spreading on their own. So different pollinators are attracted to different flowers based on their color. But I've found purple flowers tend to be very popular. So if you're looking to bring pollinators to your garden, consider purple larkspur and Verbena bonariensis. Purple also looks great during golden hour. And just like that, the poppies were no more, leaving purple to dominate the end of spring. The poppies were no more, and now it was time for the patiently waiting Rudbeckia to have their moment. In another bed, Echinacea were also showing why they're a favorite in the garden. This variety is called Powwow Wildberry, and the best part about them is that they retain their color for months. All of these larkspur were also self-sown. I planted 6 larkspur from starters about 3 years ago, and now they reseed on their own without any intervention from myself. So purple and yellow are always a nice combination because the colors are opposite each other on the color wheel. That makes them complementary colors. Combining purple as a cool color and yellow as warm can actually make the other appear more vibrant. yellow pops of color began to emerge everywhere, including this volunteer Coreopsis. I had a hard time removing this unexpected Coreopsis as a small plant, so I just incorporated it into the planting. And also some mellow yellow Echinacea, a bit different from the classic purple. I haven't seen this variety before, so I'm trying it out for the first time. And these Rudbeckia maxima are some of my most favorite perennial plants. They provide really lovely cabbage-like foliage. They're really nice structural plants with a lot of height, and their massive cone flowers can last for months. Summer also brings in pink sunsets and, of course, pink daylilies. And oodles of Echinacea, because you can never have enough Echinacea. Here's Powwow Wildberry again, but you can also see some Powwow White in there as well. And the Melted Society Garlic lives on, so give it a round of applause from home, everyone. This Gayfeather, or Liatris if you want to be boring, sends up its purple spires in the summer. Liatris punctata mucronata is the Texas native Gayfeather. This sloped area is always very dry. It might be smart in the future to make tiers for this area, but for now it is home to plants that don't seem to mind the dryness. These include sea holly, Jerusalem sage, and their very unique flowers, and these Ami green mist. Walking into the back area, there's a David Austin rose called the Generous Gardener. So generous that this katydid used it as a rest stop. Or I guess a meal maybe? I love David Austin roses because the quality is very apparent. Similar to Queen Anne's lace is Dara, which is essentially a fancy carrot. Easy to grow from seed, they feature beautiful umbels in different shades of maroon. But be aware that they may also look like this after a windstorm. And I'm glad to announce to everyone in the world that yes, my snapdragons survived, and I thank you for your concern. And I think if I was a little more diligent about fertilizing, I would have had more flowers. But honestly, I was happy to even get these after all the crap they went through. The gradient on these snapdragons is really nice. You end up with 3 distinct colors as the flowers grow and fade. It starts as pink, and as the flowers mature, they change to orange and then finally yellow. This open throat Chantilly snapdragon made it clear why I hung in there, waiting patiently after they were so delayed. And I also grow dahlias from seed, which can be a lot of fun if you've only grown them from tubers. I'll usually try to snip the growing tip off, which results in more branches and hopefully more flowers. Once in the ground, they grew fast. They do benefit from frequent feeding, so try to do that if you can. As you can see, I have quite a range of flower forms. I particularly like this variety that is described as a cactus form. It's kind of a silly term in my opinion because, obviously it's not related to a cactus, but I suppose it's a way to kind of describe the little quilled florets. This purple variety, from a mix called Harlequin, was actually the first dahlia to flower this year. This is a collarette dahlia which features a small ring of flowers surrounded by a larger ring of flowers. The seed-grown dahlias tend to have a more simple flower structure, which can be good for pollinating insects that can't quite navigate through the million petals that those giant dinner plate dahlias tend to have. See what I mean? And this is also the first year that I would have a quality harvest from my Sam Houston peach tree. I couldn't believe how many peaches were forming. It was just wild to me. And for the next year, I'm definitely going to thin out the number of fruit so that I'll end up with fewer but larger peaches. And here is one of the jars of peach preserves that I made. And it was really amazing, and I ate it all. I also spotted butterflies appreciating a few overripe peaches too. In other tree news, I have 2 magnolia trees and their flowers continually impress me. They've been slow growers, but again, the flowers are amazing. And they even produce cones. Moving to the back area, the colocaceas and the Salvia Blue Victory were both beginning to get going. While this combination wouldn't naturally come to me, I love seeing the purple hues of the colocacia blend with the blues of the salvia. I was a little worried that the colocaceas would struggle with the amount of sun that they would be receiving. They basically got direct sun from 10 AM until about 5 PM. And of course, my beloved Adenium obesums get an up-close view of it all. These Adeniums I think are about 5 years old, maybe 5 or 6, and each year they bloom more and more. And now they're mature enough to set seed, which is really funny because now I find tiny little Adeniums spread throughout my yard. Look, here's one now. Aw, look at that little guy. In time, the Salvia Blue Victory began to fade, while the Salvia leucantha, or Mexican sagebush, really got going in the hottest part of the summer. I've really fallen in love with this plant. It's just a really impressive, drought-tolerant, and easy-to-grow plant. Nothing really seemed to affect it. Not the high temperatures, or humidity, or the fact that I forget to water often. I also used the sheer size of the Mexican bush sage to help shade the colocaceae. Here you can see the Salvia Blue Victory on the left with its spent and faded blooms, and on the right the very robust Mexican bush sage. Across the stairs is my baby, the Alnwick Rose from David Austin. I've got it underplanted with some catmint that I also grew from seed. And just be aware, planting catmint may bring a very specific pollinator to your yard. Adjacent to that, I've got Salvia Gregii on the left and Salvia Yangii, the Salvia formerly known as Perovskia, aka Russian sage. Overall, I was really happy with how these two areas came out, largely because I had no expectations going in. As always, the garden is a work in progress and will continue to evolve with time. Fall began with me trying to get sunflowers in the ground. Not sponsored, but I chose Sunflower Selections for their extensive variety of what? You guessed it, sunflowers. They typically do best sowing the seeds directly in the ground because they have a taproot. It's just such a rewarding plant, and I definitely recommend them to anyone that's kind of starting out in gardening. Typical of sunflowers, the plants grew fast. You don't really need to worry about fertilizing these beasts unless, of course, your soil has little to no nutrients. Sunflowers have really evolved in their appearance, and now you can get seed for really cool bicolor hybrids from many sources. This is basically an extension of my Sunflower Diaries video that I produced a year or so ago. Of course, every once in a while you'll end up with a little runt, and you will love it all the same because you are an equal opportunity gardener. And just remember that if you do take seed from the fancy hybrids, you'll likely end up with sunflowers that have reverted to their wild forms. Both honeybees and bumblebees can be found doing laps around the center of a sunflower. And while technically I believe they're pollenless, the bees still enjoy collecting the nectar. I love a bicolor sunflower for their unique look. It has sort of a fiery center to it. One day I really want to learn how to start beekeeping. I think I'm far from making that a reality. Don't encourage me, but also encourage me. Well, 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 what do we have here? I believe it's a yellow garden spider. I really liked how this garden bed was coming out, and I don't think I was the only one. Seeing a yellow garden spider bouncing on their web is something that inspired both joy and absolute fear in me. I guess we'll just give it some space. The colocaceae officially survived summer, even if they had a few extra crispy bits because of it. By early fall, my dahlias had become tired and disease-prone, so I did a hard chop. I blame the high temperatures, which dahlias do not particularly like. It's fine though, because for me, they go dormant in the hottest part of summer and like to rebloom in the fall. I thought we were done with you. If they didn't return in time to flower, I also mixed in some sunflowers for good measure. I was not about to waste this lovely raised bed real estate. Now, I don't grow a lot of food, and it's just something that I'm not great at, and I've come to terms with that, but I do enjoy growing these icebox watermelons when I can. The variety is called Mickey Lee, and they're great if you don't have a lot of space for a sprawling watermelon vine. I like using trellises that I buy for my sweet peas for this. Growing a watermelon on a trellis helps with space issues and provides a lot of ventilation for the plant. So there wasn't a lot of time to grow these watermelons, and I think the watermelon knew that, at least I tell myself it knew that, only deciding to grow 3. So we'll see how they come out in a bit. In a makeshift bed, I decided to grow some ornamental corn. So I sowed some Painted Hill sweet corn from Botanical Interests. And only a couple weeks later, the plants were well on their way. You can see that even the bloom tassels have different colors to them. Pollination can be difficult when you plant only a few corn, like myself, because as I was reminded, each of these little hairs is connected to a single kernel. Again, not a farmer, but simply a gardener attempting to grow some snazzy corn, which is a botanical term. I don't think they nearly had enough sun and perhaps even water, but I did see the corn cobs poking out of their husks, so I knew around then it was about time to harvest. So I picked the corn when the label said to, and the anticipation was real. What color would they be? Would it even be corn? Did I absolutely fail? And sure, some of the cobs were quite meager, but overall the colors were fantastic. And I decided to do ornamental corn because it reminded me of when I would visit pumpkin patches as a child, and they would have these really beautiful ornamental corn growing all over the place. Nom 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 nom. I particularly like this stunning deep red variety, which has a bit of iridescence in the sun. There's just so much complexity in each corn cob. They're a lot of fun and also great fall decor. The garden was also quite popular with spiders this year. This green lynx spider was kind of a wild find. The spider has excellent camouflage being green, and like a lynx, it does pounce on its prey. While it does prey on beneficial insects like this honeybee, this poor honeybee, it can also be of potential use for pest management. Unfortunately for me, it's just, eating bees. And of course it's working on two because I guess one just isn't enough. Flash forward a few weeks and I think I even caught it with an egg sac. Whoa. Now back to the garden where, oh God, they're following me. In no time, the vine filled out the trellis and I had begun to see fruit. And aren't they just absolutely adorable at this stage? Now that the watermelons were of substantial size, I decided to provide them with some support, let's call it. I just simply ripped up an old t-shirt into strips and used that. It's breathable and stretchy and, well, it's definitely cheap too. This was basically a slow motion race against time. While temperatures were still perfect to be growing watermelons, the days were becoming shorter and shorter. I was running the risk that my watermelons would not ripen in time. Maybe you're like me, but sometimes I just grow plants just to grow them. The fun to me is the excitement of checking in on them each day, observing changes and watching the life cycle play out. But it also doesn't hurt to have a really nice watermelon in the end. The plant was becoming tattered from all the wind we had been receiving. I guess that's one drawback in trellising your watermelon plant, just so you're aware. And there we have 3 gorgeous icebox watermelons. The sunflowers we planted were beginning to flower and I loved them. The variety Starburst Greenburst showed why a hybrid sunflower can be so nice. They were mostly semi-double flowers packed with florets. I think that this would be a really cool plant to grow for children. It's quite a tactile flower, one that kind of asks to be pet. And they're so durable that you really don't need to worry about petals falling off. This variety reminded me of another I had grown in the past called Goldie Honey Bear, and maybe some of you have also grown them as well. I was just happy to keep the garden colors going far into November. This unseasonably warm fall allowed me to grow cosmos as well. And the Mexican bush sage just kept flowering. It's not only a wonderful bedding plant, but you can also grow them in pots. If you look closely, the flowers are actually fuzzy, kind of like a kangaroo paw plant. Of course, they don't flower as much, but the color is just as strong and vibrant. Here's one paired with a helenium. And speaking of heleniums, here's another. Going back to the front, the Texas native Cenizo, or Leucophyllum frutescens, is a really pretty shrub with silvery foliage. After a really good rain, you can actually see them flowering all throughout the city with really lovely purple flowers. And back in the Devil Strip, I decided I would introduce some perennials and provide some structure. And before you go to the comments and say, "This looks crazy," just wait until next year. I planted Russian sage, Mexican sagebush, and Coreopsis that I grew from seed, along with some echinacea. But mostly all you can see here are the switchgrass that are blooming in fall. You can also see some self-sown Gomphrena popping up from seed from last year. Again, the garden is beginning to echo throughout the years. So we've reached the end of this year of ups and downs. I've grown many plants, nurturing them from seed, and honestly, I've probably killed just as many. But it's all part of the process. And now I'm curious, did you see any plants that you might be interested in growing for the next season? Tell me in the comments. And feel free to tell me what type of future content you'd like to see more from me. Now, it takes a lot of time to document and edit all these videos together, so if you would like to show your support, I've included a donation link in the description. $1 or $2 keeps these plant adventures going and goes directly to improving the content. But please do not feel any obligation. And if you can't get enough of me, I am also on Instagram @Botanical, where I share my botanical adventures along with my ceramics, if you're into that sort of thing. Keep on growing, and thank you, as always, for watching.